A lot just changed after week 5 in the NFL, and here's what I mean. There were a decent amount of injuries, especially to some of the game's biggest stars, and how is it going to impact you and your fantasy team? Well, I'm glad you asked, because here are the players who will benefit the most on your waiver wire in your league. You should pick them up before your friends do. And we'll start in Arizona with a running back that you probably haven't heard of, and I'm going to try and say his name, Emari Demercado, and this is what you're going to see here. This guy's literally unowned. And this is the reason why I bring up his name, because of this right here. James Conner got hurt this past week, didn't return with a knee injury. He has a history of knee injuries, and as Jeff Mueller points out right here, it could be, based on the video, a twisting of his right meniscus. He then later clarifies that it was actually the left meniscus because the video was slipped. This could be, big one here, multi-week for Conner. James Conner is an older running back, so that is a little bit of a concern with some past knee injuries. So here's what you need to know. Once James Conner left the game, the only running back, and there were other running backs active for this game to see a touch, was Emari Demercado. He played 44 total snaps in this game out of a possible 57. And he ended up looking pretty decent. He had 11 total touches on 13 opportunities. He posts 57 total yards, finds the end zone. I mean, he basically filled in a one-for-one replacement in some ways for the role of James Conner. Now, let's give you some more background and context on who Emari is. Demercado, he is an undrafted rookie out of TCU. And he actually played 5 seasons at TCU, and it wasn't until his last year, his 5th-year senior year last year, where he actually saw a good amount of usage. He saw 121 carries, nearly 700 rushing yards, 7 total touchdowns during this time. He was actually a backup to Kendre Miller at TCU last year, the Saints middle-round rookie who posted nearly 1,400 rushing yards last year. Now, Emari himself is actually a very good athlete. He has well above average agility and speed, as you can see right here, and he's about a 215 to 220 pound running back, so he slides right into what James Conner's role and prototype was in this offense. And now here's maybe the most telling and important piece of information that we can give you on this situation. Outside of playing Houdini and telling you how long James Conner is going to miss for, this right here, Corey Clement was actually active for this game. Corey Clement is somebody that they signed to the active roster for this game. He is somebody that is a veteran and that he's been on this roster in the past, but despite that, they went with the undrafted rookie to see all of the touches. Now, keep in mind, Emari has been seeing his role evolve the past couple of weeks, mostly as a passing down back, but if he starts to see the 3-down usage, well, he can be a key waiver add for you if Conner misses time. So really, in all 12-team leagues or deeper, you should be targeting Emari as one of the priority adds on waivers this week. And another running back we have to keep adding, because he was in this video last week. Look, for the second week in a row, I'm going to tell you about Chuba Hubbard. Because here's the deal. Look at this. Miles Sanders, this is the Panthers injury report heading into this week. We knew he was dealing with a groin injury, but look at it. He had an LP. The LP is limited participant, a limited participant, and then the big one, an FP. He was a full participant in practice on Friday after practicing all week, so it seems like he is fully over this groin injury, and that's important because despite him being over this injury, or at least based on the practice report, it seems that way, well, he actually played 1 less snap than Chuba Hubbard in this game, and his overall usage went down on the early downs. According to PFF, these running backs roles switched. It was actually Miles Sanders seeing the 3rd down satellite usage, while Chuba Hubbard was the early down grinder and the goal line type usage back. And so far this season, we've seen Chuba Hubbard be more efficient. He's gained a 1st down or a touchdown on 37% of his carries compared to Miles Sanders on just 15%. Now that stat is courtesy of PFF Pro Football Focus, and here's why all of that is important. The schedule for Chuba Hubbard coming up is not so bad. You have a matchup against the Dolphins on the road. That should be a potential blowout. Maybe he sees passing downs, but then look at this after that. Matchup against the Colts, Bears, and Texans. Those are 3 great matchups, especially the Bears and Texans, arguably the bottom 2 defenses right there with the Broncos in the league. So Hubbard becomes this nice add because he's already like a flex play in deeper leagues, but obviously way more upside if he keeps taking the role from Sanders, or Sanders, who is often injured, gets injured again. Now, the next man up is one of the top ads on the week, especially in deeper leagues, because he's available in over 60% of leagues, and that is the Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver, Rashee Rice. Very quietly this season, Rashee Rice, on his limited role in terms of his overall routes run, he hasn't been an every down receiver, but he ranks 13th in yards per route run. But when you factor out the guys who are not qualified, they've only ran a couple of routes, so they're inflated stats. Well, he's actually top 10 in this metric. And if you're curious what yards per route run it is, well, it's what it sounds like. It's the amount of yards you get per route run, and it actually correlates the most with future wide receiver success. Now, this past week, Rashee Rice only runs 10 routes, as you can see right here. It ranks 5th on the team. Actually, 6 different wide receivers are rotating in, but despite only running 10 routes, he earns 5 targets. He earns a target on 50% of his routes, finds the end zone again, and puts up a nice stat line of 4 catches for 33 yards. Was arguably, yet again, the most efficient wide receiver, even though he's being used as like the wide receiver 4 or 5 in this offense. So what we're doing here is we're betting on the ascending rookie, because typically this is what you see happen. You see, as the year goes on, especially when the bye week approaches, the rookies get more of a role. And if you're not familiar with Rashee Rice, well, last year in college, he ended up being a 2nd-round rookie because of this production. 96 catches, over 1,300 yards, and an elite 30% target share. So he's earning targets right now in the NFL. That is usually something that sticks the most. He earned targets in college, 30% as an elite number, he's earning targets per route run at an elite rate right now. And yes, not to mention Patrick Mahomes is still his quarterback. It seems like Travis Kelce's injury was only an ankle injury, so he shouldn't miss any time, maybe a game at most, but having Mahomes is going to be the cheat code. And the schedule coming up is fantastic. This week, the Broncos, probably the best matchup you can find. A matchup against the Chargers should be a shootout after that. A matchup against the Broncos, again, the best matchup you can find. And then a matchup against the Dolphins should be a shootout. So all 4 of these games coming up are fantastic for the Chiefs' weapons. I'll take a bet on the ascending one in Rashee Rice, who I originally, like a week or two ago, was like, you might want to just drop this guy. None of these guys are worthwhile. But now, let's just take a shot, especially in deeper leagues, based on the usage that's continually seen with him earning targets. So we'll go from a wide receiver to a tight end. And if you're finding this content helpful, make sure to hit the subscribe button as we push towards 100,000 subscribers, and it would allow you to see my future content. I appreciate you a ton. And by the way, towards the end of the video, I'll go through a huge list on Sleeper of all the potential guys who could be available in your league if you're in an extremely deep league, and some of these names we're mentioning are not available. And that tight end we'll talk about is a veteran, and it's Logan Thomas. And how about all these veterans like Zach Ertz and Logan Thomas coming back from injuries, some of them gruesome injuries, and still producing? He's available in over 85% of leagues. And I don't expect him to be that available after this week because he just posted a massive game, just 2 weeks removed from returning from injury from another concussion this year. He has 11 targets, over 20 fantasy points, was like the best tight end on the week in many instances, him and Sam Laporta. And you can maybe say that you were expecting to see this because you have a younger quarterback in Sam Howell. You have Eric Bieniemy, the new offensive coordinator there, who's always used tight ends, hence obviously the number one option he's had in Travis Kelce in the past with the Chiefs. Now let's explain some of Thomas's season. It started out great, a 25% target share in week 1, but then he gets a concussion in week 2, misses week 3, somewhat limited in week 4, and the offense just looks terrible. And in week 5 on Thursday Night Football, and the matchup you can take advantage of against the Bears, he posts that great game we just talked about, earning 23% of the targets. And Thomas is mostly lining up in the slot or out wide, and he ranks top 10 in tight end efficiency. All of this is great. He is somebody you need to add in all leagues. Now, somebody I never wanted to have to add this season, but it's come to the point where we basically can't ignore it, is D'Onta Foreman of the Bears. And the reason why we can't ignore it is because currently everybody in front of him on his depth chart is injured. Look at this. Khalil Herbert is expected to miss a couple weeks with a high ankle sprain. Okay, so he's out of the picture. Roschon Johnson got a concussion on Thursday Night Football. Will have 10 days to recover, but still the concussions, basically every player has missed the next game coming off of a concussion. And even Travis Homer, a satellite back, a third down back, he's dealing with a hamstring and not expected to play. So there's a good chance that all 3 of these running backs won't be available next week for Chicago. So in the short term, the next 1 to 2 to maybe 3 weeks, you're going to get D'Onta Foreman seeing a larger role, a very large role next week, especially in the red zone and on early downs. Now, a little background on Foreman. He is an older running back. He did have a nice year last year. He posted over 900 yards. He averaged 5 yards per carry. He had 5 games of over 100 yards for a bad Panthers team. And he was a top 10 running back last year 3 separate times. And he's sort of like Derrick Henry light in the way that the Panthers used him last year. He got stronger as the game went on. He had 8 games of over 20 carries because he's over 230 pounds. And the reason why he is so appealing is because, especially next week, if he gets the full workload, he's at home in a nice matchup against the Vikings. And after that, it's just good matchups. The Raiders and the Chargers. These are like the 3 games until Khalil Herbert will be back. All 3 of them are positive matchups. So Foreman is worth an add in most leagues if you need some running back help, maybe some bye week help, but also make sure to put Roschon Johnson, who might miss this week with a concussion, but put him on your list for the following games after that. Now, the next man up is somebody that D'Onta Foreman will face next week, and it is KJ Osborn, who's available in over 90% of leagues, and now he needs to be on your radar if you need some receiving help. Because this past week, I mentioned at the top of the program, we lost some guys due to injury. Maybe we lost them from a short-term standpoint, like, we talk about Travis Kelce. Maybe it's a somewhat longer term, and we'll see what happens here, but Justin Jefferson has a right hamstring. Jeff Mueller is saying don't be surprised if he's out 1 to 2 games, and if that's the case, we're not going to know who the wide receiver 1 is on this team. Maybe it's Jordan Addison, but maybe it's going to be KJ Osborn, who's available on waivers. And this past week, they leaned heavily on KJ Osborn. He started to see even more targets when Jefferson left. He earns 9 targets in this game, 5 catches for 49 yards. He hasn't been great by any means, but he's been able to produce in his few years with the Vikings. Now, this team was basically using the same 3 wide receiver sets they've used all year: Addison, Osborn, and Jefferson. Once Jefferson went down, you saw Brandon Powell, who's a journeyman, basically mostly a special teams player, spent some time with the Lions and had success out of the slot. And then N'Keal Harry saw 1 snap. So for the most part, I'm expecting it to be Osborn, Addison, Powell, and maybe N'Keal Harry if Jefferson misses. And the good news is Osborn already knows the offense. It's not like he has to learn the offense. He's coming off the bench. No, he's already running over 90% of the routes every week. He's averaging 5 targets a game. And also, very quietly, especially with TJ Hawkinson and Jefferson on this team, KJ Osborn leads the team in end zone targets. And your end zone targets correlate the most with potential touchdowns. And the reason why he is so appealing is because if Jefferson only ends up missing 1 game, well, that 1 game is next week against the Bears. the Bears, who basically, if it's not the Denver Broncos, are the next best matchup you can find out there. And that's going to be a nice spot for all of the pass catchers here, especially one if you're in a bind who's available in 90% of leagues. I would go ahead and grab some KJ Osborn. And for what it's worth, the Vikings still this season ranked top 5 in pass rate over expected, meaning in situations of neutral pass, of when they're leading, they're still throwing the ball more than expected. They rank 3rd there. The only teams higher are the Commanders and the Chiefs. So we'll move from a veteran in KJ Osborn, who's carving out a nice career for himself and could be a nice option for you next week, to a rookie running back. And that rookie is Kendre Miller of the Saints, who is available in over 90% of leagues. Now, this past week, we saw season high and thus career high usage for Kendre Miller, as he saw 16 opportunities, turned them into touches, 16 touches, and had over 90 total yards. And here's the most encouraging thing about this usage. It came literally one day after the Saints cut Tony Jones. So Tony Jones was a running back on this team who was a veteran. He's been one of the least efficient running backs in the NFL the past 2 to 3 seasons. So they said, we're cutting you. And the next day, there was an increased role for Kendre Miller. And not only was that role increased, and it was because of a blowout. It's not like he was taking touches away from Alvin Kamara directly during the crucial times of the game, but he was able to produce on this, which is only going to mean good things moving forward. And this shouldn't be too shocking because it's basically exactly what he did in college. He averaged 6.2 yards per carry in college. When you factor in his few receptions, that number in terms of yards per touch went even higher. So Miller becomes a solid waiver wire stash, even with Jamal Williams expected back soon, who was one of the worst running backs in the league the first couple of weeks of the season in terms of efficiency. You got to add Kendre Miller in any 12-team league or deeper, because look at this team. You have Jamal Williams battling injuries and inefficiency. Obviously, Alvin Kamara is aging and has battled some injuries in his own right over the past 24 to 48 months. And it's not like Kendre Miller is the staple of health, but he's at least the youngest back with probably the most juice left in his legs. And speaking of getting more juice, if you want more juice into your fantasy league to smack around your buddies, win your matchup, and take home a fantasy championship, the Fantasy Blueprint right here is for you. Every single day of the week, I'll be sending you a tool to do just that. From the waiver wire tiers early in the week, you can see rest of season rankings, projections and rankings, and game-by-game matchup notes. This is what the weekly rankings and projection will look like. And look, I'm not just projecting 24 running backs for you. I know some of you are in some really deep leagues. So if you scroll here, you can see my projected fantasy points from my model. You can go all the way down. I'm going to project out 59 running backs. I'm going to project out basically 100 wide receivers, go all the way down to like 50 tight ends, 30 quarterbacks, everything you need to know from a projection standpoint. The game-by-game notes are also great. These are just small samples of what you get in the blueprint. And the blueprint is extremely simple to get. You just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below to join the over 3,000 people currently using it. And here's the deal. If you don't make your fantasy playoffs, by the way, this is just $5 for the entire year if you go through this route. If you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll refund that $5, no questions asked. This is 100% risk-free for you. So to get access to your fantasy blueprint today, just click the link in the description below or scan the QR code on the screen. And the next man up is Tyjae Spears, who honestly, he's a nice flex play for you if you're in a deeper 12 to 14 man league based on the usage he's seeing right now, but also he's an ad in case something happens to Derrick Henry. Because for the 4th time this season, and a reminder, they've played just 5 games, so 80% of the games, the rookie Tyjae Spears has played over 50% of the snaps, seeing 32 of a possible 61 snaps in this game, just 5 less than Derrick Henry, and he's played more snaps than Derrick Henry in 2 out of 5 games. And this week was by far his most productive, which is great to see as the season goes on. The rookie is only getting stronger. On 11 touches, 12 opportunities total, he ends up seeing 69 total yards, producing both on the ground, a nice 19-yard touchdown run, and in the air on 5 targets, having 35 yards. And it's just relatively easy for Spears to carve out this role because he's a dynamic pass catcher on a team that doesn't have a lot of them. And it's interesting because he's almost game flow independent. He's getting carries when the game is close, and when the game's out of hand, he's seeing even more snaps, more passing game usage. And this is a team that has a bad passing defense. They're going to give up points, which means probably more opportunities for Spears are coming. And now so far this season, he's seen 4 or more targets in 80% of his games. That's where the appeal comes from. You're getting some solid flex upside and some standalone value, but the obvious upside if Derrick Henry misses time. So try and add Spears in all of your leagues. Now this next wide receiver, a rookie in Josh Downs in Indy, has been quietly consistent through the first 5 weeks given his 3rd round draft capital. And this is exactly what we saw in college. He's coming off of back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons with 2 different quarterbacks, and look at this. He earned an insane 34% target share in college. 97th percentile, this number, that means top 3% of all time according to Player Profile. He profiled out as a nice number 2 wide receiver option coming out of the draft, maybe a slot option, can play a little on the outside, and that's what we're seeing as he's paired next to Michael Pittman. This past week, he had a great game. 6 catches on 6 targets, 97 yards, and the important thing here is that Anthony Richardson left this game, but he earned 3 targets and 3 catches from Richardson, and 3 catches and 3 targets from Gardner Minshew when he came in. And now over the last 4 weeks, you can see week 2, week 3, and week 4, his routes have increased every week. He's been playing 82% of the routes over this time. This past week, yet again, he plays over 80% of the routes. He's slowly becoming an every down player for this team. And now here's the appealing part, is that this next week, he has a nice matchup. On the road as slight underdogs, which means more potential passing. It seems like Anthony Richardson's shoulder injury should keep him out for a week, which means means Gardner Minshew means less mobile rushing for your quarterback, so more passing in a matchup where we just saw the Jaguars give up over 350 yards. So we're looking at some projected volume this week of maybe 7 to 8 targets. That makes him a strong waiver at least for this week. Now the next man up is a tight end that's probably more of a deeper league ad. I'm talking 12-team leagues, but if you're in a bind, he has been producing even for 10-team formats, and it's Jonnu Smith in Atlanta, available in over 80% of leagues. Because for the second straight week, we saw production out of Jonnu. 7 targets, he goes for 67 yards on 6 catches. His only catch that didn't happen was a tough catch in the middle of the field. Maybe he should have came down with it. That would have gone for like another 15 plus yards. And now in week 5, Jonnu Smith saw an elite role, 27% of the targets. I mean, if you're looking at the end of the year, the overall season, like 3 or 4 guys will be able to do that if he kept up this production. And not only is he earning the targets, he's efficient on them. He ranks 3rd right now in the NFL in tight end efficiency, averaging over 2 yards per route run. And because he spent time with the Titans and Patriots on run-first offenses, people kind of just view him as a blocker and don't remember how good of a receiver he is. And not only can he catch passes and is a solid receiver, he is an elite athlete according to Player Profile. Above average catch radius, burst, and speed. This is a great fit for an offense that wants to put 2 tight ends out there, run the ball a lot, and then put play action. That benefits tight ends efficiency. And for the first time this season, which is encouraging for Jonnu Smith in this overall offense, Desmond Ridder looked really good, completing 28 of 37 passes, over 300 yards, a couple of total touchdowns. And look, he did this against the Texans, which they actually have a solid secondary, believe it or not. So Jonnu is a solid streaming option if you need one, especially with the bye weeks coming up. So now I want to hit you with some quick hitters like Robert Woods before we get into the big sleeper list of all the names that could be available in your league. Robert Woods just had 7 targets. He now has 6 or more targets in every game, and Tank Dell is dealing with a concussion, might miss next week. Another name to watch is Justice Hill, who was the only running back to see over 50% of the snaps for Baltimore this week, but other running backs were involved, namely Gus Edwards, as you can see here, playing 30 snaps to 39 for Justice Hill, but Hill did see the goal line usage. Another potential streaming tight end is Dalton Schultz. He found the end zone for the second straight week, a Houston offense that only continues to be moving the ball. He ends up getting 10 targets on 25 routes here. And now let's scroll through some sleeper names here. You can see Matt Breida is not really an option anymore with Saquon returning. I think Khalif Raymond was interesting for this week, but Amon-Ra St. Brown not thought to be a major injury. Same thing for Jaleel McLaughlin. He finds the end zone, interesting this week, but Javonte Williams should be returning next week after he practiced on Friday. Curtis Samuel is interesting because he continues to earn a ton of targets. He's yet to score under 6 fantasy points in any game, but he doesn't have a massive game just yet. That's an interesting name as the Commanders are throwing at the 2nd highest rate in the league. I saw a name as I was scrolling, and it was Jameson Williams, and he is somebody to point out because he made his debut this past week. Now keep in mind, Amon-Ra St. Brown did not play, and neither did Jahmyr Gibbs, but Jameson did play the 3rd most snaps on the team. He was tied with Josh Reynolds, 28 snaps apiece, which is interesting that Josh Reynolds was so low down. Reynolds was dealing with injury coming in, but the bad thing for Jameson, his first overall target he drops. It would have been a 15 plus yard gain. His second target, he goes backwards for 3 yards on a screen, so it wasn't the greatest start for him, but a name to keep in mind. If we keep scrolling here, Gardner Minshew does come up, and I do think that he's in an appealing option because he has a nice matchup next week. It looks like Anthony Richardson with the shoulder injury shouldn't play. Shane Steichen, the Colts head coach, is making things easy for Gardner Minshew, and he's just looked good. He's looked solid. So if you need a streaming option, you're in a bind, he's a nice player to be targeting. We talked about some rookies in this video, a rookie wide receiver like Josh Downs. Here's another one in Jonathan Mingo. This Panthers offense looks bad. The offensive line looks sketchy. Bryce Young does not look great, but the rookie Jonathan Mingo, in every game he's played, he's seen 5 or more targets, and roles for rookies should only expand as the year goes on, and you hope this Panthers offense only will get better going forward. Now, out of this list of running backs that are left, let's look at it. Tyjae Spears, we talked about. Samaje Perine, not as appealing when we're going to get Javonte Williams back. We hinted on some of these other names on here like Chuba Hubbard, Justice Hill. I'm not really seeing too many other names that are standing out. Roschon Johnson available in 48% of leagues. That's somebody that you want to be looking at. Kenneth Gainwell available in 48% of leagues. Somebody that you want to be looking at. I do think Rico Dowdle's an interesting hold in your 12 to 14 man leagues, especially when the playoffs get closer because of how good Tony Pollard's role is. Rico Dowdle's the only other running back seeing usage there. For the wide receivers, we talked about Josh Downs. Wan'Dale Robinson sees 6 more targets this week, but if you're watching these games and if you were unfortunate enough to start him like I was, yeah, 5 catches, but just 17 yards. He's only being targeted like 1 or 2 yards down the field. It's hard to have upside on any of that. Chase Claypool joins the Dolphins. They've made every single player look good. There's talks about him becoming a tight end. Maybe if you're in like a 14 to 16 man league, I could be swayed into adding him. Jaden Reed plays on Monday Night Football this week, depending on when you're watching this. I don't think that he's going to be the sexiest of option for many people out there with Christian Watson returning, but this is a guy who's seen basically like 40 or more receiving yards in almost every single game. I think he had 37 in one of those games. He's being used downfield at the 7th best rate in the NFL. Jaden Reed, in my opinion, is at least worth rostering, and you got to add Zay Jones, but here's the deal. Zay Jones returned last week, and he looks great. Finds a touchdown right away, has a couple of catches, and then he gets hurt again. But when he's out there, he is the starter over Christian Kirk, so if you can put him in your bench and stash him for a week or two, he is somebody you want in a good offense. So this is everything you need to know for the waiver wire heading into week 5. And if you want to see exactly the players that you should be targeting in trades heading into this week, well, when that video is out, it is going to pop pop up right here for you beautiful people. And if you made it all the way to the end, take 2 seconds because 70% of people who watch these videos are not yet subscribed. So make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can see all my future content.